In the waning days of July 2016, two travelers, Pavlina Puva, 33, and Andre Peter, 27, found themselves adrift in the southern wilds of New Zealand, chasing the kind of adventure that for some is indistinguishable from escape. They were Czech, young, and restless, working the apple orchards of Motueka and Riwaka to fund a journey that had, by then, become as much about searching for meaning as it was about seeing the world. Queenstown, with its promise of winter work and alpine grandeur, had drawn them south. Andre, a snowboard instructor by trade, hoped to find a place on the slopes. Pavlina, with her easy laugh and quick hands, imagined herself in a bustling kitchen or a mountain lodge. But the jobs never materialized. The days grew short, the money thinner, and the restlessness that had propelled them halfway around the world began to gnaw. So they did what so many before them have done when confronted by the blank spaces on the map. They went tramping. They took to the hills around Queenstown, testing themselves against the sting of the alpine wind, the crunch of frozen earth beneath their boots, the wild promise of the unknown. It was a kind of pilgrimage, a way to measure themselves against the indifferent vastness of the land. Eventually, they set their sights on the Rootburn Track, a 20-mile traverse through the high country, threading the border between Fiordland and Mount Aspring National Parks. The Rootburn is one of New Zealand's great walks, a phrase that, in the right light, sounds less like a trail and more like a dare. In winter, the track is a different beast altogether, snowbound, wind-lashed, and, in places, all but impassable. The Department of Conservation, in its understated Kiwi way, describes it as the ultimate alpine adventure. For those who know the mountains, the subtext is clear: come prepared, or don't come at all. Pavlina and Andre stopped by the DIOC office in Queenstown before setting out. A ranger, grizzled and wary, told them to reconsider. The snow was old, he said, but treacherous. The forecast was grim. They listened, nodded, and shrugged it off. No new snow, they reasoned, meant no new danger. They would hike the Rootburn, then continue on the Cappels track toward Glenorchy. Andre could read a map. Neither had real experience in snowbound mountains. On July 25th, they parked their battered camper van at the Rootburn Road trailhead and spent the night there, the track ahead of them a ribbon of possibility winding into the unknown. The next morning, they set out, traveling light. Too light, perhaps, for the conditions. No crampons, no snowshoes, no ice axes, no tent. They would rely on the huts spaced along the trail, small sanctuaries in a vast and indifferent wilderness. That first night, they stayed alone at the Falls Hut, a Spartan shelter 4 hours up the track. The next morning, they pressed on, aiming for Harris Saddle. The forecast warned of trouble, but the sky seemed steady enough, and hope is a stubborn thing. Then the snow began, at first a gentle drift, then thickening, relentless, each step heavier than the last. What should have been an hour's walk stretched into 5, the trail vanishing beneath drifts that swallowed their boots and erased the world behind them. By the time they reached Harris Saddle, exhausted and half-blind, a sign pointed 3 hours onward to Mackenzie Hut. They believed the worst was behind them. But the mountains had other plans. Not long after leaving the saddle, the storm surged. Snow fell harder, visibility collapsed, and the ground beneath their feet turned treacherous. By 5 o'clock, darkness swept in. The wind howled, and fog closed around them like a fist. They switched on their headlamps, the beams barely piercing a meter into the dense night. Track markers vanished. The ground turned unfamiliar, and they circled in confusion, each step indistinguishable from the last. Exhausted and lost, they had no choice but to huddle by a sheer rock face, their only shelter. With no tent to ward off the cold, they crouched under a thin flap of fabric. The night was long. Pavlina sat awake, afraid the snow would bury them if she dared to close her eyes. Dawn brought a clearing sky. From their makeshift refuge, they could finally see Mackenzie Hut, just beyond the snow-covered ridges that had hidden it from them the day before. Driven by the promise of warmth and a dry roof, they set out with new energy. The marked track twisted steeply toward Lake Mackenzie, choked with snow. To save time, they chose a shortcut, a decision born of exhaustion and desperation. But the terrain betrayed them, drawing them higher onto a spur that led nowhere. When they realized their mistake, clouds had gathered thickly and a biting wind swept over the mountain. "We'll give it a go another time," Peter muttered, more to himself than to Pavlina. They turned back, hoping to retrace their steps, but the snow had erased all but their own scattered footprints, looping like ghosts in the white. Pavlina felt the cold digging into her bones, a deep chill that made her clumsy and slow. She watched the color drain from Peter's face, his movements stiff and erratic, though he insisted he was fine. Night crept in again. They stumbled forward, urging each other on, with words that felt thin against the wind. They stopped by a large overhanging rock to catch their breath. Pavlina went ahead, searching for any sign of the trail. Peter stayed behind, saying he'd be right along. When she returned, she found him in a strange state, his down jacket off, mumbling that it was all buggered. He seemed too warm, his face flushed even as the temperature plunged. She knew what that meant, hypothermia. But Peter brushed her off, claiming his jacket was too heavy. They pressed on, the hut so close in their minds they could almost see it. Pavlina led, Peter following behind. She looked back once to find him stopped, staring at the ground, his eyes glazed and distant. She called softly, but his voice was strange, his words slurred and nearly unintelligible. He bit down on a piece of wood as if to keep himself grounded, but it only made him seem further gone. He was slipping away, and she knew it. Without warning, the snow gave way beneath them, and they tumbled into darkness, the earth swallowing them whole. Pavlina lost her headlamp and a glove in the fall, leaving her disoriented, but she scrambled down to find Andre, her hands numb and raw against the frozen ground. He was there, caught between branches and rocks, his backpack wedged tight against his back. He was breathing, but barely. She tried to pull him free, but he was trapped, the weight of his pack pressing him into the branches. His breaths grew shallower, each gasp catching in his throat. She knew he was suffocating, could hear the desperation in each drawn-out breath. But no matter how she tried, she couldn't move him. Fear paralyzed her. Dread that moving him might send them both tumbling into some unseen gorge. Slowly, unbearably, his breathing faded. The night swallowed his gasps, and Pavlina was left in silence. In the dark, she found a headlamp in his backpack, her hands trembling as she dug through his things. She checked his pulse, hoping for a beat, a whisper of life. She was alone now. She sat beside him, her strength waning, the cold pressing in. The wind whistled through the trees, indifferent, as she kept vigil beside him through the endless night, holding on to what little warmth remained. Unable to move Andre, Pavlina stayed by him 2 more nights, the mountains silent and unmoved. On the third day, the weather broke. The clouds thinned, and a pale sun filtered through the branches overhead. Pavlina forced herself to move, to gather what little strength she had left. She knew she could not stay. If she remained, she would die there, another lost traveler swallowed by the mountains. She took Andrei's headlamp, his gloves, anything that might help her survive the journey out. She pressed her lips to his forehead, murmured a final goodbye, and turned away. Each step was agony, her legs trembling beneath her, but she kept moving, driven by a stubborn flicker of hope. The landscape was unrecognizable, transformed by snow and wind. She followed the faintest traces of the track, the memory of where they had come from. Sometimes she saw footprints, her own, looping back on themselves, a cruel reminder of how easily one could become lost. She moved slowly, conserving her strength, pausing often to rest and gather her bearings. As the day wore on, the sky darkened once more. Pavlina found shelter beneath a low overhang, curling into herself, willing the night to pass quickly. She dreamed of warmth, of sunlight on her face, of Andrei's laughter echoing through the hills. When she woke, the world was silent, the snow falling softly around her. She pressed on, her mind narrowing to the simple act of survival. One foot in front of the other. Breathe, move, don't stop. The mountains offered no comfort, no sign that she was on the right path. But she kept going, because there was nothing else to do. By midday, through a haze of exhaustion and cold, she glimpsed the faint outline of Mackenzie Hut in the valley below. With the last of her strength, she clambered over boulders along the lake's edge, slipping and falling, until a misstep plunged her into freezing water. She dragged herself out, soaked to the bone, but now so close that nothing could stop her. Inside the hut, she found food, gas, and firewood. Her fingers were numb and white, her feet swollen so badly that it would be days before she could force her boots back on. The hut became her sanctuary, her only link to survival, but in those first days, it was a hollow comfort. Grief hit her hard and fast. Andrei was gone, and all that remained were cold walls and the silence of the alpine peaks pressing in. She nursed her frozen hands and feet, wrapping them in blankets, knowing the hut was her only hope. For 24 days, she rationed the scant supplies she found, stretching each meal as far as it would go, determined to survive. She used ashes from the fire to scrawl a desperate H for help in the snow, hoping a rescuer might see it. Unable to walk far, surrounded by avalanche paths, she stayed put, trying to regain her strength. She exercised outside the hut with a heavy pack, fighting the gnawing grief and hunger. The nights were brutal, the quiet so deep that her own breathing seemed to echo off the mountains. Each morning, she forced herself to move, to check her supplies, to keep her hands and feet from succumbing to frostbite. When her fingers stopped bending, she knew things were getting worse. Sometimes, she heard aircraft overhead, the distant whir of engines, a fleeting hope. She waved her jacket, her scarf, anything she could, but the planes flew on, oblivious. In the long hours of solitude, she tried to fashion makeshift crampons from broken gear, hoping to reach the divide shelter near Teanau. But the gear fell apart after only a few steps, leaving her with nothing but the vast whiteness and a sinking heart. Even the thought of trekking out seemed impossible now. All that remained was waiting, through the long hours and empty nights, for some miracle to find her in the silent grip of the mountains. Back in the world, concern grew. When Pavlina and Andrei failed to return, friends and family posted their worries online. Vladka Kennett, the Czech consul in Glenorchy, saw the messages and alerted the Department of Conservation. After nearly a month without contact, a rescue operation was launched. Police found the couple's van at the Rootburn car park, and search teams began combing the planned route. A helicopter swept over the track, and as it neared Lake Mackenzie, the searchers spotted Pavlina, jumping up and down in a fluorescent vest outside the hut. On August 26, 2016, they found her alive in the emergency shelter, weak, frostbitten, and emotionally shattered. She was airlifted to safety, rushed to the hospital, where doctors marveled at her condition. Remarkable, given all she had endured. 2 days later, searchers recovered Andrei's body on a steep slope, 2 kilometers from the hut. The police investigation was methodical, unsparing. The couple had set out on an alpine track in the heart of winter, ignoring warnings about weather, terrain, and avalanche risk. They carried no locator beacon, told no one of their plans, and lacked the gear that might have saved them. No snowshoes, no ice axe, no tent, not even enough warm clothing to withstand the sub-zero nights. Andrei's exhaustion and hypothermia were inevitable, the Mountain Safety Council concluded, but not unavoidable. A handful of different choices: heeding the ranger's warning, turning back at the first sign of trouble, carrying a beacon, could have changed everything. The coroner's report was blunt. The couple lacked the experience and preparation to make informed decisions in the mountains. They had been warned, but the lure of adventure, the belief that they could push through, had proved stronger than caution. In the days after her rescue, Pavlina stood before the world, her voice steady but shadowed by loss. She spoke of the ordeal, of heavy snow, low clouds, and the desperate nights spent in the open after Andrei's death. She described trudging through waist-deep drifts, losing the track, and finally reaching the hut, only to realize escape was impossible with her frozen feet and avalanches all around. She admitted their mistakes, not telling anyone their plans, not carrying a locator beacon, underestimating the winter. Her message was clear, a warning to others to respect the mountains, to prepare, and to never take the wild for granted. In the end, the mountains had given her nothing but silence and a hard-won lesson. The wild, for all its beauty, is indifferent. It does not forgive mistakes. For Pavlina, survival was not a triumph, but a reckoning, a reminder that adventure, when stripped of its romance, is often just a matter of luck, and that the line between wonder and tragedy is as thin as a snow-covered ridge in the heart of winter. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe for more real-life adventures and survival stories. Stay safe, and thanks for watching.